There we go. All right.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and move on to, as Becca mentioned, our last panel, and this panel is really going to be about how do you identify jobs to apply for, and what role networking plays in getting those jobs, and then also a little bit about the application process. And so I'm excited to announce our 4 different panelists, and so I'm going to give a brief introduction to each of them. And so our first panelist is Dr. Amber Carmen Arroyo. And so she has a PhD in health psychology with a minor in quantitative methods. And her research really focuses on how technology can be leveraged to improve health behaviors. She's currently working full-time as a postdoctoral scholar at UC Merced, researching the implementation of behavioral science and digital health. She also consults part-time for Somnia Health, where she applies evidence-based techniques of behavior change to their web-based program to empower users to successfully treat their sleep apnea. And she's also previously worked at Sleep Score Labs, which is a consumer sleep startup with a smartphone app for sleep improvement. Okay, our second panelist is Dr. Chelsea Carpenter. Dr. Carpenter is currently the U.S. Clinical Program Manager at Actia, which involves developing and managing clinical trials that use their clinically validated Actia device to monitor blood pressure. Before joining Actia, she completed her PhD in exercise science at the University of South Carolina with Dr. Delia West. She then went on and did a postdoctoral fellowship at the University of Florida with Dr. Catherine Ross. And her research portfolio centers on utilizing technology for the dissemination of evidence-based behavior change interventions, and how different technologies, specifically wearable devices, smartphones, et cetera, can be used to prevent and treat chronic disease. And so our third panelist is Dr. Harpreet Nagra. I apologize if I mispronounced your name. And so Dr. Nagra is an applied behavioral scientist, a clinical researcher, and a licensed psychologist. She has 17 years of experience in behavioral science, working in a variety of clinical and behavioral interventional roles. Her specialties include health psychology, chronic illness psychology. She's dedicated herself to supporting people living with mental health challenges and developing programs that lessen the associated emotional and behavioral challenges. She's also a leader in building equitable and inclusive designs in digital health and clinical interventions, and an avid reinforcer of Tequity, which is the strategic effort to employ technology to advance health equity. And I've never heard that term before, and I actually really like that. And then finally, her most recent roles include executive director of a mental health virtual clinic called Diabetes Redefined, executive education faculty at Harvard Extension School, and expert in network at Optum. And so our final panelist is Dr. Lauren Stein, sorry. Dr. Stein earned her PhD in pharmacology and physiology from St. Louis University School of Medicine. She completed a postdoc at the University of Pennsylvania, where she was funded by an NIH F32 fellowship. And she's currently working as a bioinformatics scientist at Spatial Genomics in California. Okay. So, yeah. Okay, so let me find, so I can pin everyone, or did you already do it? Okay. All at the bottom.
If you want to get started.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. But before we get into kind of the application process, how networking plays a role in this, I wanted to start by giving each of you all an opportunity to introduce yourselves and also tell us a little bit about what job you have and kind of what your day-to-day looks like. And so we can start with Dr. Carpenter.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Chelsea Carpenter, and I am the clinical program manager at Actia. So Actia is a Swiss startup that developed a clinically validated blood pressure wearable to help people monitor their blood pressure passively and automatically. And so as the clinical program manager, my role is to help with the development, implementation, and evaluation of the clinical trials that we have going on in Actia, specifically in the United States. So knowing, this is actually my first time working with medical devices. So I have a lot of experience with wearables, so that was definitely a challenge for me of, the FDA regulations and some of those different things. So there's a big learning curve when I first started. And I should say I've been there for about 8 months now. And so really, again, helping get these trials set up, getting as the sponsor, getting all the paperwork, all of the RB submission, the FDA submission if necessary. It's a lot of paperwork, but a lot of fun as well. And so I've really been loving it so far and look forward to talking to you more about it.
Awesome. Thank you. Let's go ahead with Dr. Carmen Arroyo.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. So I'm a behavioral sleep scientist at Somnia Health. It's a small digital health startup that has a web-based intervention to increase adherence to the CPAP machine, which is the primary treatment for obstructive sleep apnea. And I incorporate principles of behavioral science from the peer-reviewed literature to this web-based intervention to increase its efficacy, as well as in doing some testing along with patients at different medical centers to implement this web-based intervention. And yeah, that's all I have right now. I look forward to hearing your questions later.
Thank you. Okay, so let's move on with Dr. Stein.
Hello, thanks Rebecca for inviting me to the panel. Nice to meet all of you. So I am a bioinformatics scientist working at a small biotech startup company called Spatial Genomics. At this company, we analyze highly multiplex biomolecules to try and identify what they are, as well as their location within single cells. We do this through a technology called seq-fish or sequential fish. It's like based off of fluorescent in situ hybridization. So at this company, we developed the platform and the software and the analysis tools to take an investigator from start to finish. My role is really on the latter end and doing the analysis, so helping to develop bioinformatics pipelines for analyzing single cell data. And I will say that I am not classically trained in bioinformatics or in coding. I am totally self-taught in both of those things. And where I've been able to kind of inch my way into the field is bringing all the translational skills I have as a PhD scientist in pharmacology and physiology, applying that knowledge to people who have a bigger, greater understanding or deeper knowledge of coding and bioinformatics. So even if you don't have a PhD in the thing, if you're passionate about it and you want to do it, it can be done.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so then Dr. Nagra, and if I'm mispronouncing that, you can introduce yourself.
It's Dr. Nagra. Thank you.
Nagra, thank you. Sorry.
Yes. It looks like Niagara, but it's not Niagara. So thank you for having me, and Rebecca, thanks for inviting me for the panel. And I'm so excited to be here, given all the expertise in the room. I'm excited to hear what everybody else has to say. So I am, as the introduction said, I'm a licensed psychologist and also a behavioral scientist. So I've worked at a number of different types of executive roles within startups, applying behavioral science in a variety of different ways. But nowadays, what I do is a lot of consulting. I still do teaching, and I still do clinical work. So a lot of my work is focused on providing clinical translation of behavioral change principles into a digital environment. So as an expert in network at Optum, I work with a few startups who are wanting to advance behavioral health programs in a digital context. And so my job is to make sure that they're doing it with integrity, fidelity. And so I take on different types of consulting projects according to whatever their needs might be. And we work through that project with a specific timeline and figure out what the additional needs might be so I can hand off those projects to somebody within the company. And then I had a previous role being an in-house subject matter expert for a company called OneDrop, where I was, again, translating clinical concepts as well as supporting the digital mobile app that they were developing. So I would work directly with the product team to identify what kind of behavior change techniques they could digitize and use to improve engagement and retention and support their users on a regular basis. So nowadays, like I said, I spent a majority of my time consulting, but I still see folks for clinical work, coaching, as well as teaching at the Harvard Extension School.
Okay, thank you. So this is actually a very diverse panel in terms of the different types of industry positions, et cetera, that you have. So I guess let's start with a very simple question, which is, how did you go about finding your current position? And in addition to that, where would you suggest people go and look for positions that are similar to the ones that you all have? And maybe we'll go in the same order and start with Dr. Carpenter.
Yeah, so I will say that I never really intended to go into industry. I was kind of always on that tenure track route, and I was always focusing on publications, and I was going to be an assistant professor. And so when I really came to terms with, you know what, that's not what I want. I kind of hate writing. That's kind of, publications, grants, whatever it may be. Really had to figure out, okay, so then what do I want? And so I sat down and so I was a postdoc at the time and really thought about what I liked about my day-to-day. So I knew I hated writing. So nope, let's not do that. And I realized what I really liked was the kind of day-to-day of research. So that project management aspect of it. I liked helping with recruitment. I liked setting up projects. I liked making sure that people went through the pipeline. And so that's really kind of where I started, is looking for things that had to do with behavioral science and project management. And I initially started, so there was a job at WW, which is Weight Watchers, as a clinical trials manager. And as I was reading the description, I was like, oh, wow, like this is, so a lot of my background is in behavioral weight management. So I was like, I would be perfect for this. And so that really helped me in trying to tailor down, what I might be interested in, because if you just put in behavioral science, I mean, that's lots of things, as we all well know, that can span a lot of different topics. And so what I did was I used that as kind of a starting point to help me find other job titles that might be of interest to me. And so that's what I would recommend to do, is if you're part of a professional network, look through job descriptions and look through boards at conferences or whatever it may be, to help you get some kind of keywords that you can find, and then use that to do job alerts on LinkedIn. So I will say that all of my job searching and applying was through LinkedIn. And so I was fairly lucky that I was able to find a job that way. But those daily job alerts were amazing, because it would send me, 30, 40 jobs a day that I could sift through. And I had a goal of doing a job application a day, which sometimes I would cheat a little bit and do 3 on one day. So I was, free for the next day, but, really helped me hone that skill in the job application process and really try to get my name out there to get a job.
Awesome.
And it worked, obviously.
Yeah, it definitely did. Okay.
Yeah.
Dr. Carmen Arroyo. Yeah.
I'd love to just echo what Chelsea said. LinkedIn can be your best friend, and the algorithm's pretty strong. So if you continue to click on jobs or check out companies that are relevant to you, they'll give you other new companies that may be of interest to you. Definitely finding people that do something that you're interested in, and then looking at the company that they're at or the title of their position and putting that in your LinkedIn search absolutely helps. I did a lot of my applying to jobs by having a running list of companies that people I admired worked at. So looking at their websites directly, and then mainly through LinkedIn was how I applied through them. But there was sometimes differences between what was available on the website and LinkedIn. So LinkedIn wasn't always getting updated. So if there's a company that you're really interested in, definitely go to their website. But the way I actually got my current position was from some work I did while I was getting my PhD in graduate school. I learned pretty early on that academia was maybe not for me long term. I really love the fast pace of industry and having a tangible product at the end of the day that I can continue to iteratively improve. And it's not here's the project and now I'm done, that it's been published. So I started studying digital health and the behavior change techniques that can be applied to different health programs that are delivered in a digital context. And that includes smartphone apps and websites. And now I'm getting into virtual reality. But my candidacy thesis for my PhD program was looking at the behavior change techniques implemented in fully automated mobile health apps for sleep improvement. And the founder and CEO of the company I work at right now saw it published in the Journal of Medical and Internet Research. I think he had been checking articles that were on there for anything relevant to his company. He reached out to me and we met a few times just to learn more about his company. He had some questions, and after a few meetings, he asked if I was interested in coming on in a more formal capacity, and I was, and that's how it's been going so far. So there's multiple avenues to get your job, and it may just come out of nowhere, seemingly.
Thank you. Dr. Stein?
Yeah, so kind of to build on what I had said earlier, I was really starting off with, I had developed a huge network of scientists and collaborators within my field. And then when I decided, like a crazy person, to go in another direction, I realized I really didn't have any connections in this new field. And so I was kind of starting over. Now, I will say I used my current network that I had to try and find anybody who I could talk to with, who was in the bioinformatics space. That being said, LinkedIn was really, really helpful. I know the other panelists have said that. I paid for the extra membership. I really liked that because I sent out a ton of cold messages, LinkedIn messages, a ton. So I would look online for people who were working at the company I wanted to work for or had the job that I wanted. And I would message them and say, hey, I just want to talk to you. I want to hear about your experience, you know, what you did to get your job. What is the field, what direction is the field going into? Is somebody like me even, you know, in the competition here? And so I did tons and tons of those messages. Granted, like 5% of them got answered, but of those 5%, they really did take me in avenues, and I learned so much. And I attribute being able to get a position outside of my field based off of those informational interviews I did with people in the field that I wanted to go into. So yeah, lots of LinkedIn messages. The job that I had gotten was through a LinkedIn post. And I also kind of reached for the job that I wanted. I know it's really scary to apply for a job where you don't check all the boxes, and I still struggle with that. But if you can just push yourself, you can apply to those easy ones. Like, that's easy. Just in addition, just do a few that just as a reach. It's like the dream, where you want to go, what you want to do, and apply for those. And so this was one of those jobs, was in a field that I wanted to go into, and I didn't have publication history in it, didn't really do research directly in it. And yeah, and so through that process and just demonstrating that I was excited for the field and I had translational skills, allowed me to land the job I'm in today.
It's awesome. We've heard that throughout the day, that not selling yourself short is very important. You have more skills than you think.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So Dr. Nagra?
Yeah. So I was in academia. I was an assistant professor at a health institution, and I was also doing private practice on the side, but I had a very niche job. I was in diabetes. I was a subject matter expert in diabetes. Because I was doing private practice, I had also started building a digital presence. And mine was actually on Instagram, not necessarily LinkedIn. I go on LinkedIn, but not as often as I probably promote my practice on Instagram. And so I had been doing a number of presentations and interviews with different companies and organizations. And I was recruited to do a podcast for the company that I eventually ended up becoming an in-house subject matter expert for. But I think that the lesson that I learned from that whole process was that it's really important in this day and age to have a digital presence, especially if you want to work in digital health or in the types of work that we've all listed so far. So whether it's, it's Instagram or LinkedIn or Twitter, whatever is you pick your poison with the social media piece. But whatever you are, whatever you enjoy doing, as long as you can be consistent with how you show up, somebody out there will pay attention to it. And then, so I was recruited by OneDrop to be the in-house consultant. But I think the other piece that I learned while I was doing this executive role was that building your network is absolutely key. The only sort of shortcut to success in kind of jumping into a new field or a subspecialty is to get to know the people who are doing it, right? And to build those relationships and to demonstrate and share your skill set. And that might also mean that sometimes you end up doing some work for free for a little bit. You have to kind of tackle different projects, not only to build your own portfolio, but also to demonstrate that you can translate many of these skills that you learn in academia or in higher learning into the industry. So I did end up doing a few projects where I didn't get paid at all, but the experience itself was much more worth it than the payment that I got at the end of the day. So for example, I had been talking about burnout on a number of podcasts, which is it was related to diabetes burnout, but health burnout, parenting burnout, employee burnout. There's a lot of mental health factors that cross over across each of those different types. So last week I did a presentation at Amazon as they're building out their employee resource group, specifically on improving mental health well-being or emotional wellness for their employees. And so you never know who's paying attention. And this was work that I'd been doing for years in the past, but now burnout, we all know, is a very hot topic. So people are reaching out to me as a result of the digital presence that I have, and they know that I have the expertise to back it up. So I think digital presence and building out your network are the two key points to keep in mind.
Awesome. Thank you. So we, clearly keep hearing, you have to build your network. So kind of the next question that I want to run through all of you is, other than just maybe cold emailing, how else is there, what other methods are there for networking? Do you all attend conferences or anything of that nature? And we can start with Dr. Carpenter.
Yeah, so my favorite conference is the Society of Behavioral Medicine. So it's mostly behavioral researchers that attend it. And there are it's definitely increasing in their industry presence. So when I was looking for jobs, they had some great panels that I could go to and really go up and talk to people afterwards and say, this is exactly what I want to do. How did you get here? And so that was really helpful in that. And just I kind of ran into this block because all of my mentors were academics. And so, my postdoc mentor was super supportive when I told her, hey, this is not what I want. I'd like to go into industry. She's like, that's awesome. I'm so happy for you. I can't help you. I know academia and that's it. And so I kind of had to forge that trail on my own and really try to reach out to some people through LinkedIn. I'll admit I did not do that probably as much as I should have, because I consider myself lucky and got a job fairly early on in my job looking process. But even just there are, again, looking for those industry professionals in your professional societies that you can reach out to and talk to, because even if they're not in the exact same field, they'll at least have some advice. So one of the big ones for me was saying what salary you wanted. So I did not expect that when applying for a lot of jobs to say oh, how much should we pay you? And I'm like, oh, I don't know. With a lot of the assistant professor positions, it's a fairly cut and dry process. And so, I had never really, I'd gone to a salary negotiation workshop a long time ago. So I wanted to find, not lowball myself, but also not, say a number that's going to be so astronomically high that they're like, okay, she's really full of herself. And so that was somewhere that I struggled. And so did reach out to some people to say, okay, how do I go about this? And really ended up looking at the like, I think it's Glassdoor. So some of those other profiles that provide salary ranges for these positions, because especially with mine, it's a Swiss startup. I'm like, oh, I don't know what they're going to say. You know, this one's a whole different process here. And so just really doing my research and then trying to leverage those connections as much as I could.
Thanks. Dr. Carmen Arroyo, do you have any tips on networking that you like to use?
Yeah, so definitely shout out to Society of Behavioral Medicine. That's been one of my primary ways of networking. It was actually the first conference I attended in graduate school, and they have special interest groups, including the Behavioral Informatics and Technology Special Interest Group, which has a fabulous group of researchers who are interested in tech research. And there's also a growing number of people who are also in industry who are part of that group. And going to these conferences, something that has really benefited me is going through the conference program and looking at, you can oftentimes, now that it's all digital, there's apps and you can search by institution. So you can look at different companies that are going to be there and then look at which scientists are presenting their research, and then reach out to them about their work and asking for, you know, to grab a coffee between sessions sometime via email. Or you, and then another way is going through by topic area, so technology research, and then looking at the different abstracts and reaching out to people who are doing research that you're interested in, whether or not they're in industry. It's fun to just chat and really build your network. And chances are, if they're doing a lot of tech research, they probably have some connections with industry. But also something really important has been my colleagues and people in my cohort and other programs, reaching out with them and using that network as well, like sharing resumes and meeting on Zoom and talking about how different interviews went. So learning from their experiences can be really beneficial as well.
Awesome, thank you. Dr. Stein, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so I started looking for a job in 2020, right when all the conferences were being canceled. So I had to really think of creative ways to begin networking. And one of the positives from COVID is it did push a lot of societies and groups to put their material online for free. And so I spent a lot of time looking for like interest groups and the thing that I was interested in, joining that group. I would join their Slack channel. That was a lot of fun. And then I would go to any Zoom session they had, like sign up for their mailer to get notifications of any meetings that they're having. But yeah, like doing the Slack channel is fun. I try to do like just like fun message boards, I guess. It just feels not so formal and
More natural.
It feels more natural, and you can, it's easier to make like a natural connection on those message boards. And then when you go to talk to them, it's a lot easier. So yeah, I would recommend that. I did do some meetups because I was interested in coding, and even though, you know, not everybody there was in biology, I still learned a lot from that. So even if it's a skill or something that you want to develop in, and it's not specific to biological research, you could join a meetup group and you'd be surprised at how much valuable information you'll gain from unexpected places.
Thank you. Dr. Nagra, I know you touched a little bit on networking, but do you have any other additional tips or tricks for?
Definitely. So I think this is probably where LinkedIn is definitely going to be your best friend. So I didn't do a whole lot of cold calls, but what I would do is on LinkedIn, it gives you people who are obviously, you know, everybody that's in your network, but it also shows you people who are like, you know, like the 3rd degrees of freedom, I don't, something like that, but it shows you who's like related to somebody that you already know. So what I would do is I would figure out what are topics that are of interest to me, things that I would want to work on. And then I would, of course, Google who's already doing that work, whether it was in publications or, you know, had they done an interview or a presentation somewhere. And then I would also look at, do I already know this person on LinkedIn somehow, right? So it's whether I'm directly connected to them or they know somebody else that I know. And then I would actually ask the person that I know to set up an introduction, an e-introduction for me. So by doing that, it was like, it took away the sort of cold call piece element of it. And then I would only ask for like 15 to 20 minutes of their time. And I would do like what do you call those, like an informational interview, to ask them about their job, ask them how they got their position, or just like build a relationship of getting to know each other a little bit better, since we have similar interests. And a lot of those went really well because it would be a virtual coffee, kind of similar to what Lauren was saying. I started going down this path around 2020 a little bit more seriously than I did previously. And around 2020, I had like my second child, and then we had another baby, and like a couple of years later, and I was not about to go to conferences in the middle of COVID with infants, right? And especially there wasn't that pediatric shot available at that point either. So all of my stuff had to be virtual, and it had to be focused on building relationships. And so I felt like that was an area of strength for me, and just being able to get to know people. And so I really sort of maximized who I was talking to, and where our common interests lay, and how we would potentially mutually be beneficial to each other. The other piece that I would highlight is, in addition to the networking piece, if you already know the topics that you want to work on, I would, again, in addition to socializing on all the different social media networks, I would also consider building thought leadership. So contributing, whether it's like blog posts, or if you can find online magazines that are interested and seeking articles on topics that you're interested in, building up your thought leadership list of articles, publications list, so that folks know who you are, and they associate that topic, however specialized it might be, with your name. So the more you can be active in that way, yes, it does require additional work, but if you think about it, you're looking for a job, a paid job doing this. So it means it's an area of interest. So it shouldn't really feel like a job when you're writing up the information about it. So I think that also helped me tremendously, just to be able to put a lot more thought leadership out there on content that I was already interested in, already passionate about. And then, of course, when people Google it, they see my name attached to it.
Thank you. So I think we've touched a little bit on about how you find, potential positions, and then we talked a little bit about networking and how that can help. So I want to move a little bit further down the line and talk a little bit about, once you've identified some jobs that you're interested in, how many would you apply to? How did you go about doing it? Maybe one at a time, a couple at a time, and then maybe briefly discuss if you have any kind of advice as to how to choose which ones to apply to, and maybe which ones not to apply to for a variety of reasons. Maybe start with Dr. Carpenter.
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, I did make a goal of trying to apply to one a day. So I think by the end of it, I had applied to about 40 different jobs. And I will say that I got interviews for about 25% of them. And so some of them, I ended up using an Excel spreadsheet to track the jobs that I applied to, which I will very highly recommend, because I didn't realize this, but a lot of industries will post a job, not get the type of coverage that they want, or not get as many applicants that they want, take it down and repost it. And so you'll see it and be like, oh, this is a great fit, let me apply for this. And then you see it again, you're like, wait, did I apply for this? Or is this a different position? And so, or there'll be like a different area. So, there's one in San Diego, but then there's another one in Minnesota. And I'm like, is this technically a different job? So it just really helped me. It's like the job title, the company. I was looking for remote positions. So if it was remote or in person, and then a link to the job posting. So I could really understand what I'd applied to, and then like where I was in that pipeline. And so when looking at them, I don't remember who said it, but, do apply for jobs that you might not be 100% a great fit for, because there's a lot of skills that you can learn. And we do have a lot of skills already. So you don't have to have 100% of the things on the list, just, a good portion of them, or you feel confident in your abilities to learn those skills and demonstrate that you do have that capability. And so I think one of the biggest things for me was being true to what you want, and making sure that they're not just a great fit for you, but you're a great fit, or you're not just a great fit for them, but they're a great fit for you. And so there was a position that I was interviewing for that once I got into the interview, realized that it was a lot more of a grant writing / article writing position than I was really wanting to do. And so I was just honest with myself and I was like, this is a great position for somebody else. And so, we always try to fit this mold of like, oh, I want to be the best applicant. But really we need to think about how's this for me? Am I really going to love doing this job? And I think a lot of people do focus on finding their dream job, which I will admit, I was very lucky to find mine. I absolutely love my job. However, there was a job that I was going to take before I found this job that was not quite a dream job for me, but it would pay the bills and it would help me get a lot of great experience. And so it really would have been that foundational type of job. And so don't be afraid to take those foundational jobs because you're still going to get a lot of great experience, get your foot into that door or your foot in the door. And then it gives you that jumping point for that dream job later on. My last point is just to not put all your eggs in one basket. So I did fall into that situation where there was a job I applied for. I made it to the final 2. It was like 6 weeks of interviews, I think 10 interviews during that time, very intense. And the vibes that they were giving me was like, this is your job. So I was like, great, awesome. Not doing anything else because as we know, applications for jobs can take a lot of time. And I was still a full-time postdoc at the time. And then I got to the final 2 and did not get the job. And so then I had missed out on 6 weeks of application and interviewing to find another job. And so that really was a hard lesson to learn, but a great lesson to learn that you do need to have multiple lines going if you can. So try to have different, being in the pipeline for different positions. And it was just something I was very uncomfortable with. I was more of like okay, I have this one job that I really like, I'm kind of liking it to dating. So you have these conversations, you start to like somebody, they might not like you back, but that was really uncomfortable for me. But that's just what you have to do, is to have that, those different options, because as I saw, you can get to the end and it's not actually going to be a viable option. And so even if it is uncomfortable, it's great experience, and you might actually develop some some connections to other networks through that process.
Thank you. Dr. Carmen Arroyo, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, Chelsea, a similar thing happened to me in some ways. So definitely do not put all your eggs in one basket. I had gone through the interview process with a startup, and they said at the end of the process that I had the job and that they thought that their funding would have closed by the end of interviews, but it hadn't. And so they were like, just give us a couple of weeks. And I'm like, okay. So I stopped applying because this was like one of my first choices, was really excited about it, and knew a few people at the company, and so knew that what they were saying was true. And a month went by and they were like, okay, we need another month. And then another month went by and I started to get nervous. And they said, we thought this would have wrapped up by now, but unfortunately it hasn't, because this is around the time that the market started shifting with digital health and investing. And so they said, you have the job as soon as we get the funding, but right now we don't want you to continue waiting. So then I started up after waiting, 2 months, and feeling pretty confident that I had that job. So even if the company has the best intentions and are being completely honest, doesn't mean that you should put your job search on hold, even though it does take a lot of work. So it can be tough, especially if you're working while you're applying. So definitely echo that lesson learned. And just wanted to say that, yeah, so I took a different approach with applying to jobs. I actually only applied to, I think, like 10 different positions, but they were ones that were in my network and that I was fairly confident about being able to apply to them. And definitely like tailored my resume a little bit to highlight certain experiences that really fit with the company, and heard back from a fair amount of them. And I would just say, yeah, definitely tailor your resume. And yeah, I think that's all I wanted to say about that.
I want to have a quick follow-up question. Approximately how many interviews were you guys doing simultaneously? Or were you maybe interviewing at 2 or 3 places at a time? And how did you balance that?
Yeah, so I had 3 companies I was interviewing with at one time in one scenario. And that was definitely felt a little bit like dating. And was sort of tough because you sort of have like your favorite, and then you have others as well, and you're like, well, I just hope this favorite works out, but then you also need to be like giving your full energy and attention towards these other positions. So it's definitely tough to navigate and prepare for. And during that time, I was sort of, because interviews were going really quickly, like it does sometimes in industry. So I stopped applying to jobs when I was doing that.
Thanks.
I had the same experience. I had at most 3 jobs going, or application processes going at one time. And yeah, I echo that. It's very exhausting trying to do your research on the company, making sure you have tailored questions to ask. So that's a big deal. I'm sure that's been covered before, is making sure you have good questions to show that you have a good understanding of what the company does and how you could be a good fit there and what you bring there, et cetera, et cetera. And so when having a full-time job at the same time and trying to live life and all of this other stuff, it's very draining. It's worth it, obviously, when you get the job at the end, but you do have to be really real with yourself and acknowledge that, you want a job, but you also need to do it in a maintainable manner in case you don't get something that's right away.
Thank you. Dr. Stein, do you want to weigh in with some of your approaches you took when applying? How many places? Oh, you're muted. Sorry.
Hey, all right. So I would just want to say first that, in academia, pretty well what the job titles are throughout the trajectory of getting to professor. In industry, they have a bunch of crazy job titles that don't seem to make any sense. So something I asked in the informational interviews a lot was like, what is this job called? What is senior? What is associate? Like, what is it? And so not focusing so much on the job titles, like trying to inform yourself, but really looking at, what the description of the job is. So I would just say, don't let the job title scare you away or feel like you have to be locked into a certain type of role. And then I just want to say, because obviously you want to apply for as many jobs as possible and do as much as you can. My advice is just don't get bogged down on the numbers. I think what's important is to stay focused on being engaged in the process and not getting discouraged. So it doesn't matter if you're sending out a resume every day. If your mental well-being and the state you're in is just discouraged, it's not getting you where you need to go. So you just need to be really kind to yourself through the process and listen to yourself and just do whatever it takes to keep going forward.
I think that's great advice. Dr. Nagra?
Yeah, I don't know if we can emphasize this enough, but definitely don't put all your eggs in one basket. I can recall at this point, I would say at least 5 different top tier jobs where I made it all the way to the final round. And then because it gets so competitive towards the end, you don't know what the sort of selection criteria is going to be. So, there's different personalities coming to the table, different, typically a lot of similar skill sets, but you don't know what the company needs unless you're inside the company. And I would say, especially within startup land, this is very true, where similar to what had happened to Chelsea, it happened to me. They said, hold on for a few months and it just didn't work out. And then also what happened with Amber, where they were waiting for funding to fund the job and that didn't work out. I actually had a contract at one point that they were ready to sign, but then they said, don't sign it. I got it one day and the next day they sent an email saying, don't sign it until we have this funding. But we just wanted to keep the process going. So you just don't know what's going to happen, especially with digital startups. So that's definitely one point I want to emphasize is don't wait for somebody else to kind of determine what your future is going to be. And also you never know, you don't have the job until the papers have been signed. So always wait for that final signature before you decide to stop your job search or stop doing whatever other effort you're doing. The other thing related to this, I would want to point out is even when you're in the job, you want to be looking for your next job because of how quickly and easily trends in the job market are shifting nowadays. So I would say from what I've seen in the digital health industry, a year is you're a veteran at that place. if you've lasted an entire year. Typically folks last a year to a year and a half, and then, they're moving on to the next opportunity. So there's a lot of turnover, at least that I've witnessed, and I'm sure the other panelists can weigh in on that. The other thing I wanted to point out is to always be focused on what you want. So similar to what Lauren was saying, I wouldn't be hyper focused on how many jobs you're applying to on a daily basis, because the titles vary. You just don't know what they're looking for. So really hyper focus on the job description itself and see if it's something you actually want to do, because you might make it to the final round, but then it's a job where you're doing a lot of academic reading and writing, and that's exactly what you're trying to get away from. So you don't want that. So really focus on what speaks to you. So for me, it was a lot about, I really wanted to build programs, and I really wanted to do trainings and workshops, because that's the aspect of the academic work that I really enjoyed, but I didn't want to continue. I would not be able to continue doing that if I had all these other responsibilities. So when I was applying for jobs, yes, I initially applied for jobs where I was doing research, and I was doing clinical work, and I was doing trainings. But then over time, I refined my search, because I realized that even if I got that research scientist position, I don't know if I would truly want that research scientist position, because it was all about pushing out manuscripts all the time, and I wouldn't get that one-on-one time that I wanted with teams and trainings and workshops and so on. So really figure out what is it that you like about the job that you're seeking out, and then figure out in the job description exactly the ones that are that you can cater to in that way. And the other thing to note is that jobs cycle through. So even if like you're doing a job search right now and you're not finding a whole lot of jobs with this particular title or this particular job description, it's okay. Wait a month. New jobs will pop up, or wait 2 months or 3 months, whatever. Keep your search going, because especially with startups, they're always getting new funding. Something that they can't afford today, they might be able to afford next month, right? So just keep in mind, what is it that you want to build your career off of? And that should be, I think, the guide versus, the number of applications that you can apply to just to get into the field.
I actually had a follow-up question to that. So in academia, we tend to have cycles, as we call it, where you generally apply in early fall, for example, for faculty positions. So does industry have cycles? And if not, and if they do, what kind of dictates those cycles?
My experience has been that in the industry cycles through jobs a lot faster than academia does. So I would say in academia, the cycle was always, at least from my end, it was always annually. You would kind of see new jobs pop up around certain seasons of the year. But in industry, it's been both. So far, the pattern seems random to me, but I feel like every 1 to 3 months, it cycles through a new set of jobs. At least, that's what I've seen. I don't know if others have other ideas.
Does anybody else have anything to add to that? Okay.
Yeah,
So-
I would echo that there's not really like a set cycle. It's whenever they have funding or they have decided to expand a new department. It really just depends, or if someone leaves their position and they have an open position. So it's a lot more erratic than academia, which is a little bit more consistent with how they're hiring.
I'd also say the timeline is very different. So, in academia, you apply in maybe September, October, you get an interview, you do a site visit so that you can start the following year. I think from application to signing my contract was about a month with Actia. So it was a much, much faster timeline. And so there's not quite as much preparation that's required for academic positions as far as like time ahead of it.
Okay, so I think we have about 15 minutes left. So I want to end with one question before I then give everyone an opportunity to say any, final words. But one of the things I want to briefly ask you all is, are there common documents, or can you comment on whether there are common documents that you pretty much needed for every job, like clearly a resume, but a cover letter, et cetera? And then are there any field specific documents that you all had to prepare? And then the other thing would be, do you have any tips or suggestions as to how to keep all of that organized, especially when you're applying to many different positions?
Yeah, so for the positions I was applying to, again, which are more general program manager positions, you had a resume, and with LinkedIn, they have an easy apply. So I will preface when I say like my 40 jobs, a lot of those were easy applies. I was just trying to explore different avenues and not knowing what I was really wanting to do. So it was nice just to have that process there. But for those jobs that required a cover letter, I had a job application folder on my desktop, and I had them each in folders, and would hyperlink it to my spreadsheet so I know what was connected to what. I wouldn't say I had any other types of documents that I needed for my interviews. Some people did want me to send them my publication list, so I would send that. One did want to read an article that I had published, but that wasn't anything I really had to prepare ahead of time. But really spending time on your cover letter. I don't remember who had said it, but really trying to tailor your cover letter to that position and really exemplify why you're a great fit for that position based on your experience, because a lot of the positions are very different. So, a lot of my training is in behavioral weight management, but at Actia, it's blood pressure wearable, which is actually what my dissertation was focused on. So really focusing on those skills and that experience and really ignoring my weight management experience. So really spending the time to tailor it is really important.
Thanks. Dr. Carmen Arroyo.
Yeah, so I was looking for about 2 months, and then I got that first position, and then waited a little while. And during that time, I think even from the beginning of the interview process, the founder and CEO of the company I work for now, him and I were already meeting, and it was, I wasn't being paid, but I just continued having those meetings because it's interesting, and I was happy to help in any way I can. I'm sort of the opinion it's when someone from industry reaches out, it's good to help them with science because that's something that's not always present across companies. So I would say it took about 2 months, but I was really ready at that point. I've been doing a lot of networking and meeting with people, and had already worked on resumes in the past as part of workshops and things like that. And other than resumes and cover letters, there weren't any other materials that I required for any of my applications. And the way I kept it organized was by company. I had a folder with all the different companies, and then resumes and cover letters for each of those companies. And sometimes for the bigger companies, there would be multiple positions that I had applied to. So having different subfolders there, that's a good way of doing it. And then you're able to call back on let's say it's a sleep startup, a science position, and there's another company with similar, I would use that as a template for the next resume.
Dr. Stein, do you have any tips, organizational tips that you use for your documents?
Yeah, I'm just gonna throw it out there. I use this notebook keeping app called Notion. Highly recommend it. It has a high learning curve, but that is what I use. I won't get into the whole crazy system. So, I mean, obviously you need a resume and a cover letter. Something that I did is I basically had a template that I would then modify with each application, and then I would kind of put them into like different categories, like, oh, this one's more managerial heavy, or this one's more technical heavy. And then the other thing, it's not an actual document, but like your summary statement, like something that's really clear and concise about who you are, what you bring to the table, what you want. And so if you can confidently communicate those to whoever you're interviewing with, it goes a long way.
Yeah, I like the idea of having a summary statement of yourself. Dr. Nagra, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think similar to everybody else, kind of like a templated cover letter, and of course your resume or CV. I had a number of interviews where they wanted to do some sort of presentation to demonstrate that I could actually do the job that they were hiring me for. So I had like Google Slides became my best friend, because I had to, for example, if it was a research position, kind of demonstrate what would the research timeline look like? What are the key variables to consider within the research timeline? What are milestones that we would hit? So almost like, you know, you would do with a consulting agency, they wanted to see specifically, if we hire you, what are you going to bring to the table? So I have a few sort of slide decks that I kind of use as a template. So depending, even if it's a purely clinical position, there's some sort of timeline that's usually associated with the projects that they're going to give you. So I just have project timeline template slides that I use. So one is kind of like the scope of the project, another is the budget that we would consider, of course, the timeline piece, and then key deliverables, things like that. So I can answer whatever questions they might have as part of the interview process. The other piece to consider here is that a lot of times they'll give you the prompts as you're nearing the end of your interview process. So I know many of the panelists have already shared, like, this is a multi-interview process. It's never a one and done type of situation, as it might be in academia sometimes. But I think every single interview that I've ever done, it's always been like 8 to 10 interviews minimum, because you meet with everybody that you would be working with on that team. And by the time you get to the end of the interview process, they do want you to put together a formal presentation. And then typically for me, they wanted to see, you know, how would I work with the teams that they had there? What kind of questions might I ask? What's my style, leadership style, and so on. So all that's important.
Yeah, it is nice to see some of the differences that you might encounter depending on what type of jobs you're applying for. Okay, so we have a couple minutes left, so I just want to go through and give everyone one last opportunity to say some final words, anything advice-wise for job applications and or networking. We can start with Dr. Carpenter.
Oh, yeah. So I kind of already shared a lot of my lessons learned, but I think just being confident in yourself and your skills and your abilities. I was very nervous going into this process because I'd been academically trained. What could I really offer industry? And so really doing that evaluation to recognize, actually, I do have a lot of skills and I can talk about them. And so just believing in yourself is a really big part of this. Kind of when I was talking about the salary negotiations, you know, like, you deserve to be well paid. And I will say industry pays a lot better than academia, just a little throw out there usually. Not that it's the only thing, but it's important. And, you know, just really, and again, trying to find something that you think is going to be a good fit for you, because you should enjoy what you do. You spend a lot of time at your job. And so there's obviously going to be aspects you don't like about it, but you want to be happy and want to feel like you're doing something important. And so just trying to find something that gives you that feeling makes a world of difference.
Yeah, definitely just network wherever you can. Try to get a mentor if possible, and don't be afraid to ask for an informational interview. Also go to workshops like this, seminars, whatever experience you can, or learning opportunities you can, definitely take those. And I think going to all of those, you'll realize that there's no like recipe to getting this position that you want. There's so many different pathways. Some people I know from my grad program are now working at like Twitter, for example, and they didn't apply at all. Someone just reached out to them on LinkedIn and they got that position and now they're very happy. So there's so many different avenues. So don't get discouraged and just keep trying and learn as much as you can along the way. And then definitely when you're at that end process, figuring out which position you want, be sure to consider both your professional and your personal needs and making sure that it's a good fit for you in that way as well.
Yeah, so especially for the people who are transitioning from academia into industry, it feels like a really scary jump. Like the others had alluded to, something that we're not trained in, our mentors can't really help us in. So you could look at it that way, but I think importantly, you could look at it as an opportunity to be very introspective about what it is you enjoy about what you're doing. And so finding those things and really focusing on them. And this is a chance to find that job that really, you know, focuses on that. You can build that. And so it's a great opportunity to really sit and be introspective with yourself to figure out what it is that you really want.
Thanks.
Yeah, and then the only thing I would add is that, there are probably elements of academia that you all still enjoy, which is why you came into academia in the first place. So, like I am a big fan of teaching, and so this position that I've been teaching motivation at Harvard, and it's a 1 semester gig that I have the option to continue, but I really was missing teaching, so I went back and I did it for this term, and I got my hit. I'm good. I'm probably not going to go back for another term, but I just wanted to say that because I think sometimes we think that if we leave academia, we can never go back, or there isn't a sort of a good blend where academia and industry can work together. And I think there are multiple opportunities like that. So, I have this position at Harvard, but I also have a position at UCSD where they're working on the Diabetes Design Institute, where they're teaching students how to build mobile apps and how to build digital products that could be startups or could support startups. So they're combining that relationship between academia and industry really well. So just think about all the innovation that's happening around you and where you can kind of build your network and make relationships that speak to you, that reinforce your interests and values.
Awesome. So I think we're out of time, but I just wanted to say thank you all so much. This was an awesome session and we appreciate your time. So just give a round of applause. Thank you all again.